Hello and welcome. My name's Adrian and I'm a software engineer by trade. And in this short video, I'm going to explain to you the phases that your software must go through or it's going to die. Let's jump right into it. So who am I? I've got 8 years experience working in various software companies, and I've worked in small, medium and large companies. And I know the pains of success that these businesses gone through, especially as people have shared their history and the company's history. These guys started out small and scaled up to millions and millions of customers. So let's jump right into it. Let's cover what we'll cover. So phase one, start with the backend as a service. And then phase two, we'll discuss building your own backend. And then phase three is distributing your backend. You're an ambitious young entrepreneur, and this is you up in the corner, unfortunately. You want to enter a race, which is your market, your niche market. And all the big guys or the competitors you've researched, these are the guys in the front, right? They are winning the race currently. And you're not even in the race because you don't have a car and you don't have the funding to get a car, but you want to compete. So not all is doom and gloom. There is a path that you can go through to get into the race and enter the race. So we have to create some sort of criteria. How do we get onto the racetrack? The racetrack is an analogy for the markets or the markets that your niche is in, and you want to enter the race to compete with the other race cars. So how do we do that? How do we go about doing that? Well, firstly, you want to get a race car kit. You don't want to build a custom one or spend lots of time designing a custom car and that kind of thing. You just want to get into the race and competing with these guys. You'll probably be at the back for some time, but the goal is get me onto the racetrack. So you'll get a custom car kit and follow the instructions and then get onto the track as fast as possible. You may want to choose some existing parts to build a race car and possibly make some custom ones where needed, but I would avoid this as much as possible. What you don't want to do is design the car from scratch and build each part as well. There is a time and place for this, but that'll come later down the line. So your goal is to get onto the racetrack. Get people using your application fast, right? So the racetrack obviously is an analogy, right? Keep expenses low because hosting costs is one expense, but extra additional costs that your business or your company has, like email providers, other softwares that you need to use, everything. This stuff racks up really quickly. So you ultimately want to keep your expenses as low as possible and make development as fast as possible. You want to be able to build features for your application super quick that people can use them within a week or less. Make that possible. Going back to our race car analogy, this is something that I built a year ago. Not the car, but to enter to the race, you don't want to build something like this. This is a high-performance, custom, modified car with a tuned engine and everything. You just don't have the capital and resources to do this. Instead, what you want to do is build something like this. Everything is kind of just stock parts, stock components that someone has put together and they can compete. And they can get into the race and start racing and competing with other members. So a little bit of backstory of why I'm giving this presentation. I wasted about a year last year building a supercar, metaphorically, and we got nowhere. So my team and I wasted a year on development. We skipped level 1. I'll discuss this in a second. We built a custom Nest.js backend using domain-driven design, clean architecture with domain events, open telemetry, Swagger, custom authentication, everything. We just built it all from the ground up. We wasted a lot of time. And when we realized we're not really getting anywhere with this, we decided to scrap it and just rebuild from scratch. So we decided to deprecate this project after a year, and we rebuilt with Firebase from the ground up. And in about 4 months, we had a fully featured application that we could enter to the market, the racetrack metaphorically, and start serving customers. So these are the phases that your company has to go through. So phase one, you want to pretty much give up all the infrastructure control to a third party so you can focus on your users' needs and growth. Phase two, this is after maybe a couple years' time, you take some ownership of the infrastructure control to greatly introduce more customizability of business logic and integrations. And then phase three is way later down the line. You take most of the infrastructure control to allow maximum business logic, customizability, and integrations. I know this sounds super abstract, but we'll get into it in a second, and I'll explain what this means. So as your application or your software as a service grows and goes through these levels, you will start to make more and more control, or you'll start to take more and more control and ownership or infrastructure components, not all. So these levels translate into business growth phases as well. A startup, which is usually between 1 to 10 to 20 employees, they will be on this level one phase, right? So they won't have a lot of customizability. They're going to take a lot of off-the-shelf solutions and work with that. More a mid-sized company. So a mid-sized company is anywhere between 20 and 100 employees. They're going to start to want to build custom components, custom infrastructure, right? And then when you get to the enterprise level, which is 100 plus, that's when you want to maximize the customizability because you have the resources, you have the people to be able to do this. So it's all the phases that you go through. You have to go through these. So in phase one, you're not going to have a custom backend service running because it's a layer that can be abstracted away. And I'll explain to you a bit more about what a backend as a service is. But in this first phase, when you're just starting out and you just want to get onto the racetrack, you use a backend as a service like Firebase or Supabase. And this will take a lot of the complexity, a lot of the unnecessary work that you have to do in order to get to your goal as fast as possible. So you want to build a simple front-end application or mobile application using one of these solutions. The highest priority right now for you is to satisfy customer needs by building features fast. And your low priority is to manage infrastructure. A lot of these backends as a service companies, they advertise, satisfy customer needs and build features fast and don't worry about infrastructure. I was a bit hesitant on before I went on this journey, and it is so true. It's absolutely something that is critical to your business. So which backend as a service should you use? There's a handful of them. The most popular are Firebase, Supabase, Facel, and AWS Amplify. But the decision really is it doesn't matter. These are all designed and all capable. Many people have been successful with all of these, but it's up to you. It's up to personal preference ultimately. I personally prefer Firebase. I think Firebase is a option that is the most mature. It's been around the longest since 2011, and we've personally had a lot of success with Firebase. It's really quick to get up and going, really easy to add features, has a lot of stuff built in, and because it's backed by Google owns Firebase. Google has a lot more resources to outcompete like Facel and Supabase because they have a large enterprise behind them. AWS Amplify is a similar alternative to Firebase, but at the end of the day, it doesn't really matter. Go with what you know or pick one, but I would highly recommend using Firebase. So like I said, it doesn't matter because it's not for the long term. The key point is backend as a service softwares, they are there to get you up and running. You just want to get into the race as fast as possible. So ultimately, choose whatever you like, but that's the purpose of them. However, they do come with an expense, of being really expensive. So if you think about it in a financial perspective, getting on board is really nice because they offer a generous free tier. You can get up and running really quickly, but you don't want to scale with one of these solutions, Firebase or Superbase or one of these, because they do get very expensive once you start hitting a lot of customers with a lot of requests, a lot of demand. So that's just something to keep in mind. And you naturally want to transition into the next phase. So what does a backend as a service do? Well, usually they provide these 4 critical and core features, which is user authentication. So if you don't know, user authentication is login, registration with Google, forgot password flows, all these things, sending a forgot password email, all these things are built into each of these platforms. You don't want to have to rebuild that because it's like reinventing the wheel anyways. Second, database access. So database access on Firebase. The reason why I love Firebase so much is it's a document-based database, whereas Superbase uses SQL and there's extra complexity there, like having migration schemas and all this stuff. Whereas Firebase, this is not a competitive analysis of each of them, but you don't want to have to worry about this stuff and managing a database. You just want to have something that's available to you and to get up and going really quickly. So storage is important because you may want to upload documents, PDFs, things that are maybe confidential. So like invoices and bank statements or whatever for your application. You want to be able to store that somewhere that also scales. And then lastly, functions. Functions are some sort of code that you can run that you don't have to worry how it runs, but it just runs. And a lot of these Firebase and Superbase offer functions usually out of the box. What you don't want to have to worry about is having to build authentication yourself. It doesn't make sense to ever actually build it yourself. You can completely rely on Firebase for the foreseeable future if you want to. Second is you don't want to provision the database yourself. Provisioning a database and managing it is a nightmare. It's not a nightmare, but it's a lot of extra burden that you have to take on. And it can get really expensive as well. So save this for later down the line when you actually need it, because you don't want to have to worry about who has access to it and connection pooling and version upgrades and all these kind of things. Don't worry about it. Firebase and all these providers will handle that for you. And lastly, you don't want to have to build an API service and then have to host that. Yes, there may be times for that, but try avoid that as much as possible because it's an extra thing that you have to manage. So the bottom line is we want speed to customers. We want to get into that racetrack as fast as possible with the least resistance. That's ultimately the goal. Because how do you know your solution actually works? You could spend a whole year like I did building a custom solution and then no one likes it. That's the dumbest thing you could ever do. It's a waste of time. Sure, you could learn one or two things about building software and that kind of thing. But the bottom line is don't invest so much time into building a scalable custom solution that no one may even want to use. So speed is everything. Speed is your number one priority. You don't want to worry about infrastructure. Infrastructure is things that I mentioned, like databases, all these things like hosting applications, all that stuff. Just let these providers do it for you and get to the customers as fast as possible. And then this point is it's not time to learn new stuff. You don't want to spend time learning a new framework or whatever, like hexagonal architecture, something I mentioned here. I was like, for me, that was a challenge. I want to learn this in this 1 year journey. Don't do this. You want to use stuff that you know. So I can't emphasize enough to you, speed is the ultimate determining factor if you're going to be successful or not. You want to get to customers within weeks to months, not a year or two. So phase 2, after some time that you've got your application going and people are using it, hence emphasize the word using it, you want to enter into the second phase, right? So the second phase is building your own application or building your own backend. So at some point, your backend as a service provider is going to reach limitations, or you're going to reduce the speed to getting features out. Naturally, your company matures and you outgrow the solution you started with. That's just natural. It's a natural progression. So you're not going to want to do more. So you're going to have to want to do more complex things like doing more complex queries, building reports, all these things that are a bit more expensive in terms of compute and resources and that kind of stuff. These backend as a service providers, like I said, their goal is for you to get up and running. They're not here on the long run to scale and provide additional complexity in terms of resources and things that they can provide to you. Their goal is, let's get you into the market as fast as possible, and we can capitalize on that solution that they provide. So stay with them to cover that solution, but leave when it's necessary. And lastly is when you need something custom. So your own backend, what does that look like? Build a monolith application to do more complex business logic. So that could be building custom reports, anything that requires a substantial amount of custom code that you can't house within your application, but you need it to run custom reports or custom things in the background. So usually this is custom integrations with third parties. For example, on our platform, we have an integration with Xero, which is a accounting software. And we needed to build a custom backend for that so we can sync our contacts and our clients and invoices and stuff with them. We can't necessarily do this on a backend as a service, right? So we want to keep it, we had to introduce this backend to allow that functionality. So once you have your backend, you don't want to jump and build and provision a new database with AWS or cloud or Google Cloud or anything like that. You want to use the same underlying backend as a service database. And then over time, you can slowly migrate away from the backend as a service database to a managed one. So when you introduce this backend, this custom backend, it could be Node.js, it could be C#, Python, whatever. It doesn't matter. You don't want to add an additional step, which is building a database and that kind of thing. Use the existing database that Supabase or Firebase includes, and then only start to provision a custom database on AWS or GCP later down the line. All right, so you can host this application on AWS, ECS, or EC2, or whatever, your options, whatever you choose, or GCP Cloud Run, which I prefer. Phase 3 is distribute your backend. So phase 3 comes after years of you being in the market. So you want to hire more developers to build out your solution, provided that you have scaling options. So only enter phase 3, which is basically building microservices, after you've experienced the pain of we can't scale fast enough to meet the demands of our customers. Your problem at this point, which is a good problem, is you have too many customers and you can't serve them all reliably. You have multiple teams working on your application, your SaaS, or your product. So if you have a single, like I was saying, if you have a single backend and you have multiple teams working on that, I've been in a company where that was the case. It was a banking product. They had one monolith application written in Django. and they had 2 teams working on the single monolith application. And it's an absolute nightmare. You don't want to be in this point because it is almost the case where, well, it's not almost the case, but it's the case where everyone is stepping on each other's toes. You can't make progress working on something that is a single monolith application. You have to separate and you have to distribute. So the next natural phase is to split this monolith backend into microservices. So what are microservices? Well, microservices are lots of little applications specialized in doing one task. And all these microservices come together to serve as your backend. Simply put, that's what microservices are. At this phase, you want to introduce managed Kubernetes on GCP, on AWS, whatever it is, or use a cloud-specific container orchestration tool. So AWS has a tool called ECS, which is their cloud. It's their homegrown solution for managing Docker containers. It's similar to Kubernetes. It's a lot simpler. There's a bit more pain with it, but it's not the same amount of complexity as Kubernetes will offer. And people actually prefer this over managed Kubernetes. On GCP, you have something called Cloud Run, which is a similar product. So at this point, you want to subdivide the development into multiple teams, each with their own responsibilities and co-ownership. So at this point, you will have multiple teams, each team managing a different department within the business. These teams will have certain microservices that they manage, right? So that's ultimately the problem you want to solve is you have too many teams, too many customers, you can't scale. We need microservices. At this point, you've entered the big leagues. You have product market fit and you have a large market share. Ultimately, you have scaling problems within the business and with customers. And that is why microservices exist. So how do big companies scale? They are not using Firebase or Superbase or any of these backend as a service providers because it doesn't fit the needs of the business at that time, right? And also, Firebase and all these things, they don't offer the enterprise solutions that you would need. And also, they don't have single backends running the application. Large companies use microservices to scale. So that's the end of the presentation. I hope you enjoyed it. I hope I'm getting better at making these type of content and just speaking in general. I feel like I'm not good yet, but I'm just doing a video a week and hopefully you stick around to see the rest of them and watch this YouTube channel grow a bit. So hope you had a good one and take care.